Good evening and welcome to another edition of Inside the Issues, sponsored by the League of Women Voters, Richfield. My name is Maureen Scalia. I'll serve as the moderator. And we're dividing the program into two halves tonight. The first half will feature our Secretary of State, Steve Simon. I'm having a mental block. Steve Simon. And the second half will feature the clerks of Bloomington and Edina. And the subject of the show is voting. As everybody knows, we have elections coming up on November 9th, and we're going to talk about voting issues, voting process, and voting administration. Welcome to the show, and I thank you for your coming, because I know you're a very busy person during this time of the year, and you're probably busy during most of the year.
It's my pleasure to be here, absolutely.
Okay. Secretary of State, how did you happen to find yourself Secretary of State? What's the background?
Well, my personal background is I'm born and raised in Minnesota, went to Hopkins High School, and then went out of state to college, came back, went to law school here at the University of Minnesota, so I'm a lawyer by trade. And I also then, after a few years in the practice of law, I ran for the legislature and won, representing Hopkins and St. Louis Park in the Minnesota House for 10 years. And the entire time that I was in the legislature, really from day one, I was really active and involved in issues surrounding voting and elections and democracy. And part of the reason was, all roads lead to the ballot box, no matter what your number one issue is, whether it's taxes or jobs or environmental protection or civil rights or transportation or healthcare, it doesn't matter. All roads lead to the ballot box, and whatever change that you're seeking, it's not going to happen unless and until you get people elected that share your values and your point of view. And you're not going to have faith and confidence in that election unless we have a good, strong, honest election system. So I came by this work naturally when my predecessor, Mark Ritchie, who served for 8 years as Secretary of State, announced he was retiring. I decided to run, and I was fortunate enough to be elected, and I've been in office now for a year and a half.
Great. And it's a 4-year term, and you're elected on the even years opposite the presidential elections.
That's right.
So when all the Minnesota state officers are up for election.
Correct.
And the Secretary of State does a lot of work in terms of the voting process and whatnot, and we'll talk mostly about that. But it does a few other things.
Right.
So can you talk about some of the business and other things?
Yes, for sure. And when I was running for this office, I would say 98% of the questions or comments or suggestions that I got were about the voting and elections function. I think that's what most people think about if and when they think about our office. But as you rightly point out, there's so much other work that the office does. Actually, the majority of the workforce in the office is not in the elections section. It's in the business services section.
Oh, that's
business services means that we are kind of a clearinghouse for a lot of financial and business-related documents in the state. So every company or business entity of pretty much any kind has to file initially with our office, and then thereafter once a year. We also transact a lot of business when it comes to things like liens, tax liens and others, uniform commercial code financing statements. Bottom line is, there's a lot of jargon in there, but the bottom line is a lot of what we oversee and help receive helps the wheels of commerce to go round and round in Minnesota. So we're very proud of our role as sort of the welcome mat for Minnesota businesses. That first place when any business wants to start, first place they go before they get their tax ID number, before they get licensed, before they get permits, any of that stuff, they have to file with our office. So we really are the welcome mat, and we really appreciate that work. And we're always searching for ways to add value to the business community, and we have a couple of exciting initiatives there. Another lesser known area that we're very active in has to do with domestic violence, believe it or not.
Yes, I noticed that. Talk about the Safe at Home
Right.
issue?
Yeah, we run a program called the Safe at Home program. And Safe at Home is an address confidentiality or address anonymity program for victims of domestic violence, stalking, and other similar crimes or offenses. And basically what the program is a way for people to enroll in the program and have their true physical address be confidential, be secret. So no one, chief among the former abuser, is able to find them. And so we run that program. We, in essence, act as their mailbox. So whether it's for public or private purposes, whether it's a school, whether it's a cable bill, whatever, we're the ones who sort of intercept their mail and get it to them at their real physical address, which no one but us knows where it is. And it's a lifesaver. It's something that I'm particularly proud of. And I take great care to talk with and meet with people around the state about this, both victims and their advocates, to make sure that we're doing the right thing and building a successful program. It's not for everyone, but for some people, it's a really good fit and a really important life-saving kind of shield.
Do you also involve the people that maybe because they're a witness of a crime and for safety purposes, are they also included in that, or is that witness protection under another area?
Typically, no, not in this program. Typically, that's more something like the Federal Witness Protection Program, which is done on the federal level. But this is more a state program. We were one of the first 3 states in the country to do it. Now there are over 33, I think, that have such a safe at home program. We're very proud of it, and we really take great care to nurture it and make it as effective as we can to protect those people out there who need protecting, and there are many.
And I see then that's why that also gets involved then in the process of voting, because obviously they cannot appear on the normal registration rolls. Is that correct?
That's right. And in fact, sometimes I get the question, why is a program like this with the Office of Secretary of State? Why not with the State Patrol or the Department of Public Safety? The answer has to do with exactly what you just talked about. That once upon a time, when these programs back in the 90s were first thought of, they were thought of because there were abusers out there that were finding and tracking people down using the public voting rolls, the voting records, because those are open. And they were able to circumvent and get around normal processes and find people. So that's why so many of these programs in all the rest of the states originate and are housed in the Office of Secretary of State. So we're very proud of that, and that's why it's with us.
And in most secretaries of state across the country, voting is a part of the Secretary of State definition, correct?
Right, in most, but not all.
Not all, which is very different from the federal level, which has to do with State Department and international, but on the local level and the state level, it's all more voting. And then business too, I assume that crosses. And you do business reports and everything like that.
We do. One of the initiatives that I was alluding to earlier is we have initiated a joint kind of project with St. Cloud State University, with their economists and their School of Public Policy, where we jointly put out quarterly economic reports by region. No one else in Minnesota was doing this kind of work at all, we were surprised to learn, where St. Cloud State came to us and said, because you're the welcome mat for businesses, because they go to you first, there's some interesting information and data. It's already public data. And we can use that data to make assessments and draw conclusions about where we are economically, and even go out into the future and make some short-term predictions about where we're likely to be. So we've divided the state up into 6 regions, and quarterly for each region we put out an economic report, and these are very kind of approachable. They're on our website, and they're only about 20 pages. They're very easy on the eyes, lots of charts and maps and graphs and colors, so it's not super dense and thick and inaccessible, but they're really great. And we've gotten tremendous feedback from business people, from chambers of commerce, from economic development authorities in cities and towns and counties. So we think we're really adding value, and we're always looking for ways to make them better, more readable, more interesting to people, and more useful. That's why we're doing them.
And that's an appropriate role for the state level to do. I mean, if a county did it, or a local chamber of commerce, or even the state chamber of commerce, it just isn't the same as you guys are getting the information anyway with the registrations.
Exactly. And we have a statewide reach for that reason. So we've gotten great feedback on that, and that's one of the initiatives in the business area that we're really particularly proud of.
And then talk a little bit about notaries and apostilles.
Right.
Which is a totally new term for me. So first of all, notaries, and then you can tell us what an apostille is.
Right. Well, notaries, most people know what that is, a notary public. And we're the ones who are the intake folks for people who are registering to be notaries. That wasn't always the case. It used to be elsewhere in state government. But about 10 or 11 years ago, this office, before my time obviously, took on this function and this responsibility. So when someone who's a notary wants to become a notary, or to renew their status as a notary, they go through us and we handle that and process that. What we don't do is we don't police any ethical or other violations. That is with the Department of Commerce, but we're the sort of intake people for people who want to become notaries. Now, related to that is a function, and it's a funny sounding word, it's called apostille. An apostille is, you might think of it as an international notarization. Not everywhere in the world has something called a notary, but there's some internationally recognized status or process called the apostille process, where either for commercial transactions or sometimes for immigration purposes or others, it's an internationally recognized process, much like our notary process, that provides a certain stamp of approval, you might say, to a document. And the person making certain representations about that document, about its authenticity, for example. So think of it as sort of an international semi-notary process. And so we and many other Secretary of State offices handle that as well.
And has that been a long-standing
Yes,
duty?
Yes, it's been a long-standing duty, and that's one that comes from international treaties.
Okay, because the reason I asked that, it suddenly hit me is in the process of international adoption 30, 40 years ago, I think that was one of the things we had to prove to El Salvador and India. So probably did use that service.
No, that wouldn't surprise me.
Okay. Well, let's talk about what everybody's talking about, and that is the election. And obviously, a couple of years ago, Minnesota had a whole big controversy on whether or not to require voter ID in a different fashion than what we currently do. For now, what is required to be a voter?
It's pretty simple. In Minnesota, the rule is, if you want to be a voter, you have to prove two things. You are who you say you are, and you live where you say you live. Those are two separate things. But in Minnesota, we have a very flexible and very voter-friendly approach where there's multiple combination of ways that you can do that. You can do it with a current photo ID like a driver's license, but you can also do it with a combination of maybe a lapsed photo ID, an old expired driver's license, and a utility bill. You can now use a veteran's ID card. That's new this year that our office did by ourselves. That affects over 100,000 Minnesotans, many of whom don't drive anymore and only have that VA card or that veteran ID card. You can, under some circumstances, have someone in Minnesota vouch for you. My own father had that happen to him back in the 90s when my parents moved in October, right near an election. They didn't even have a utility bill yet. And so my dad sought out someone to vouch for him in the neighborhood. It has to be someone in your precinct. The point is, any of your viewers and any citizen can go onto our website, which is mnvotes.org. That's mnvotes.org. And they can see the various combinations, which are flexible enough, yet still maintain the bedrock kind of integrity and honesty of the system. So these things are monitored, they're screened under current law, but it's not as rigid as to say it has to be a current photo ID like a driver's license, because some people don't have that, and yet there are other ways that they can prove those two things. Remember, you are who you say you are, and you live where you say you live. And there are ways to do that other than just the one, inflexible way of suggesting you do it.
Well, and Lord knows thousands of people in the state move that last 30 days before an election. I mean, there has to be some flexibility.
Right, like my own parents.
Yep. And lots of other people out there. And all of the commotion going on in other states about voter ID and proving it and whatnot, the other people say there is fraud. Now, we really don't have a history of fraud in our state, do we?
So that is a loaded term, fraud.
Okay.
I think what most
Somebody
people...
involved you twice.
Well, when people say fraud, I think what most people mean when they use it is somebody who votes or registers unlawfully. Now, that may or may not be intentional. It may be someone who thought they were eligible and weren't. I don't know if, if that person using the word fraud means that. But the point is, in Minnesota, fortunately, that has been a very, very, very small incidence. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, a study was done, county by county, across Minnesota, about how many of these incidences of misconduct rose to the level of being actually prosecuted. 38. 38 out of a state of 5.3 million. Now, I want to be clear. 38 is 38 too many. It's not to be wiped away. It's not to be diminished. It should be 0. 38 is 38 too many. But in a state of 5.3 million people, that's pretty good. And my worry always, as it was with the photo ID constitutional amendment a few years ago, and with a lot of proposals out there, my worry is this. Is the proposed cure worse than the disease? Could you, in trying to plug a hole that 38 people take advantage of, shut out far more than 38, far more than 3,800, probably far more than 38,000 people in Minnesota trying to catch the 38. So we always have to balance here, what we're doing. Is the cure worse than the disease? The voters of Minnesota decided by a pretty big margin in 2012 that the proposed cure then was worse than the disease, and I think we just got to be careful when it comes to some of those proposed solutions.
Yeah, I know the League of Women Voters fought that amendment very, very strongly. And I was at the state fair, and really, once you brought up some examples of older people maybe never even getting a birth certificate,
right,
and some other things, people really saw through it very rapidly. And and having gone through the Coleman-Franken recount and everything, again, I think even Coleman's people made a comment that there really was no voter fraud, or it was so minimal.
Right.
So
that's right.
And as far as people representing that there are other people or voting twice, like you say, it's just a small drop in the bucket.
Yeah, and I want to give your viewers and everyone confidence. We have a much copied, much envied election system in our state. Around the country, so many other states or areas in states want to be like us. We're the ones that they copy. And one of the reasons that that's the case is the high degree of confidence that people have in the integrity of the system. And one of the reasons for that is we have a very watchful law enforcement community. I have a good relationship with the county attorneys, the prosecutors out there who look for this stuff. And in terms of the people in the voter registration database, which our office runs, the statewide voter registration system, all those names are screened and filtered daily through multiple databases. Everything from records from the courts to something called the Social Security Death Index.
I was going to say.
It's to others. So we're always on the lookout, and we're always scrutinizing and filtering and screening to the best of our ability. And it's not just our office, it's others in law enforcement as well. So I think we've got a good system, in part because we've got people who are watchful, and in part because there just hasn't been as much abuse that's been found. I mean, it's a very small level, as I say, a few years ago, 38 out of 5.3 million.
Yeah, that's an incredible record, I think. And it just shows that Minnesotans know how to do things, I think.
I think so.
And we run a state well, and our government is good too. Something to be proud of. And a lot of people, I don't think, really hear those words of how well we do things. And voter is one of them. Another issue is sometimes this whole registration at the polls. Other states look and say, well, but we really haven't had, I mean, it's, the registration online and the registration at the polls, you can't even say one is more subject to fraud than the other because we just don't find it.
Yeah, Minnesota has had for over 40 years, we've had this. Sometimes it goes by the name same-day voter registration or election day voter registration. And what it means is there is no pre-election day cutoff for registration. In many states, in most states still, and some of your viewers may know if they've lived in another state, there is some cutoff. It could be October 15th, it could be October 1st. Where if you don't register by that day, you're out of luck. That's it. You are ineligible to vote in that election a few weeks later. Not so in Minnesota. In Minnesota, you can, that day, the day of the election, decide you want to vote, and even if you're unregistered, you can go to the polling place, you can register right there and vote right there. And by the way, this is not just some narrow niche marketing to some small segment of Minnesota. Over 500,000 Minnesotans use same-day voter registration every single election. So this isn't some tiny niche audience or specialized subgroup. This is a big chunk of voters use it every time. And it's worked extremely well. I think it's really moved the needle on voter turnout. It's been clean, it's been efficient, it's been easy, and people are voting with their feet. They like it and they trust it.
That's amazing. I knew there were a lot of them, but I had no idea 500,000. And that probably makes us one of the states that has the highest voter turnout.
Right.
I mean, if 500,000 couldn't vote, percentage goes down.
Right, and thank goodness we have it because, the rule in Minnesota, as in most states, is if you move, you have got to re-register. Even if you move from, say, one side of Richfield to another or one side of Mankato to another, you've got to register. Well, a lot of people might not know that or remember that. And imagine if you lived in another state, or imagine, let's say, Minnesota didn't have that law, and someone who moved from one side of town to the other was perhaps misinformed and didn't realize they had to re-register. They show up, they've been voting for decades in Richfield or Bloomington or wherever it is, and they say, here I am, and the election judge says, well, you're not on the voting rolls here. That was your old precinct. And the person said, well, I thought that I didn't have to re-register. Right. They're wrong about it. There is no recourse. That's it. They are out of luck. And so in Minnesota, we have that fail-safe. We have that backup so that people who maybe just didn't know about that requirement can still re-register on the day of the election. It's good. People love it. As I say, hundreds of thousands use it every election. Okay, so your office does everything, and I do encourage people to go on your website. Everything you wanted to know about voting is there. So we have the election at the end of the day, starting at 8 o'clock at night. Your office again gets very active. Yes. Because what happens? Well, we're the ones who sort of compile and then report the statewide election results. And we get that reported typically by counties who tally up their results and then report directly to us. And by the way, I should point out, in this age of suspicion about hacking and sort of technological vulnerabilities, that communication between counties and our office is done in an encrypted fashion. Encrypted meaning it's sort of jumbled up, you might say, in code, so that anyone who would hack that would get a bunch of gibberish. So it's encrypted and sent to us over that secure system, and then we get it. And even then, the other thing that we have in Minnesota going for us is, you know, ironically, in this high-tech era, paper is our friend. Minnesota is still, and I think always will be, a paper-based state. There will always be, and there always is in Minnesota, a paper trail. So if anyone believes that there's been some hacking, or that someone added a 0 to a candidate's vote total, or something like that, under state law, the actual paper ballots have to be maintained and kept for just about 2 years. Have to be kept. And so anyone who says that in Bloomington or Richfield or Hopkins that candidate A really had 100 votes, not 120, and someone came in and monkeyed around with the system, well, you can go back to the actual physical ballots and always check it out. Now, does that mean that nothing bad could ever happen? No, it doesn't mean that, but it means we're really, really in a good spot as compared to some states, that do the touchscreen voting, where there is no receipt or paper trail of any kind. You know, I just think that's asking for some trouble, and Minnesota, fortunately, over the years has decided we will always have a paper trail, and I totally endorse that approach. I was in the legislature for 10 years. There was bipartisan consensus. Republicans, Democrats, everybody. You've got to have a paper trail, and we do. And I have to say, that's another position the League of Women Voters strongly supports and is trying and working on getting that in all states, because with all the hacking and everything that goes on, it just scares me to no end to think an election could be totally rigged, or not, I shouldn't say totally rigged, but mishandled, and the vote not reflect what actually people want it to. Well, we have come to the end. If you have anything you want to say for about a minute? I do. First of all, I want to thank you. I want to thank the League of Women Voters, not only for this program, but for all of its work. And the one thing I want to say is this, and you alluded to it earlier. Minnesota has long been a national voting champion. For 9 elections in a row, we were #1 in the country, believe it or not, but we relinquished that title 2 years ago. In 2014, after being on top of the heap for 9 elections in a row, #1 in the country, we went down to #6 in the country. Still very good, 6 out of 50. Nothing to be ashamed of, but not up to our usual high Minnesota standards. So my goal this year, working with hundreds and thousands of partners around the state, nonprofits, for-profit businesses, schools, etc., is to get us back to #1. And if anyone has any questions about our voting system, how easy it is to register, how easy it is to vote in Minnesota, I urge everyone to check out our website at mnvotes.org. You can order an absentee ballot online. You can register to vote online. You can find your polling place online. You can find a sample ballot online for your particular jurisdiction, who's up for what offices in your area. It's a great tool, and I hope that's part of getting Minnesota back to #1 where we belong. I believe we're running out of time, so very quickly, thank you, Secretary of State Steve Simon, for being on our program. Really appreciate it. My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Well, welcome back to the second half of our Inside the Issues, sponsored by the League of Women Voters. We're going to continue with our discussion on voting and voting processes with city clerks. A lot of people don't know what city clerks do, and so we'll start out the program talking a little bit about that before we go into the election part. I am very pleased to have with me, on my immediate left is Janet Lewis. She is currently the city clerk of Bloomington. In the middle is Tom Ferber, who has been city clerk in Richfield and Edina, I believe?
Bloomington.
Bloomington, there we go, Richfield and Bloomington. And he knows a lot about the business, and he now does consulting on that issue. And on my far left is Deb Mangan. I hope I pronounced that right.
That's correct.
And she's the city clerk of Edina. And we have right with us a reason why probably these three cities of Richfield, Bloomington, and Edina do well, because they've learned to work with each other and
Yes,
many different levels and many different departments. And so I'm very, very pleased to have you all here. And for my Richfield viewers, we're not excluding the city of Richfield's city clerk. Unfortunately, she's on vacation. I'm sure she's having a good time before the election sets in. So Janet,
Yes.
quickly with you, how did you come to be city clerk?
Well, I first started full-time employment as a public servant, working for the Osseo School District. And that was a wonderful time of helping to teach English as a second language to adults and helping young people prepare to take their GED test. And from that, I went to work for the city of Crystal, and I was there for about 13 years. I enjoyed working for a small municipality where the city clerk wears a lot of different hats. And then I landed my dream job in Bloomington, and I've been here for a little over 5 years now.
Tom?
Well, I first was involved in municipal government back in the early 80s as an intern at the city of Richfield, working in the community development and community services. Back in 1985, the city clerk's position opened up, and I applied, and I was lucky enough to be appointed to that, and that kind of started my career in being a clerk. I was city clerk at Richfield for 15 years, and then I went to Washington County, where I was in charge of the Assessment, Taxpayer Services, and Elections Division for the county. And then my dream job came up at the city of Bloomington, and I was at Bloomington for 8 years before retiring 5 years ago, and Janet replaced me very well, I may say.
Thank you.
And I started my public service career as a teacher. And back in 1978, young teachers found it very difficult to find employment in Minnesota. And I was lucky enough to get a job with the city of Chaska, which was a very small community at the time, and I was able to grow with that city until in 1995, my dream job opened up at the city of Edina. And I was welcomed into that job by Mr. Ferber who in his role at Richfield, and we became collaborators on many projects together and have been in Edina for 21 years.
Oh, thank you.
Maureen, I might want to add, when I retired 5 years ago from full-time employment, I didn't disassociate myself from city clerk business. I've continued to be a consultant and assist cities and counties with election-related things, and have collaborated particularly with Bloomington and with Richfield and Edina on putting together training packages for election judges and working on forms and processes to make our elections better.
Yes.
That sounds just marvelous. I mean, it's something you don't have to do full time, and yet keeps your hand in the pie, so to speak.
I enjoy it greatly, and I think I have a lot of respect for city clerks, for the election judges, and the people that run elections, and I continue to be involved because of that respect.
A little bit, if first Bloomington and Edina can talk about kind of the general areas that city clerks do, because a lot of people don't know what you do.
Sure.
And then you can chime in with maybe in some of your experience other cities do.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Sure, I'll start. So working as a city clerk for Bloomington, I do manage a small division, but we do provide a lot of different services. So starting with passports at my front counter and all the business licensing. We also help manage a city cemetery, which is expanding. I'm very excited about that project. We are the records custodian for the city, and that is a big job in and of itself. We handle the data practices requests, and those are many. And then we manage a motor vehicle office across the street. So those of you who need to get your tabs or license renewals, generally Bloomington residents, they like to head over there on Logan Avenue. And then the very last thing are elections. And as Tom mentioned previously, presidential elections in particular, they are a full-time job in and of themselves, and yet we work tirelessly and we work long hours to make sure that all of our work gets done, meeting deadlines and making sure that we're following the spirit and of the law, and making sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted.
And as many people as possible vote.
Yes, that's right. We like high voter turnout.
In Edina, I also manage business licenses. I am the keeper of records for the city of Edina. I take care of the city codification of their code of ordinances. I take care of all legal notices and publications. I am also act as a secretary to the city council. I assist with the preparation of the city council packet and agendas, and I do all the minutes for the city council. And then in my spare time, and we run elections. And I would say that, again, it's the spirit of the law is very important. We are very fortunate in Hennepin County that we have some highly collaborative clerks. People, we work together and share training and election judge manuals and forms. And you know, many cooks kind of make this a good place to run elections. Yes. Because you have different viewpoints, and sometimes we sit in a meeting and we may have a lively discussion about why we're going to do something the way we're going to do it. But I have found that the more we can be consistent across the county makes for much, much better process and a better process for our voters.
Yes. Tom, you may want to add, you can, if there's anything different for Richfield, and then maybe quickly some of the other cities. Maybe you can talk a little bit about small places too.
I've worked for a number of cities in the past 5 years, and when I worked at Washington County, I had a lot of smaller cities, and in some of those cases, those are part-time city clerks even. Yes. And City Hall isn't even open but a few hours a week. So the duties vary greatly, but most of them do involve records and resolutions and minutes and what's the common theme or the commonality of them all is elections. Yes. That is one area where I can say that all of our clerks are involved with elections. And it's been extremely important for city clerks, particularly in the metro area, that we have collaborated together to try and put together things that are have standards and standard ways of doing things, so that we have a continuity and we're following the law and working with our county to make sure that things are done well, that our forms and processes are done well, and that our training is consistent too, so that an election judge that is getting trained in Edina and getting trained in Bloomington, while there may be some small differences as to exactly how we do things, the law portion of it and the forms and procedures that we do are all standardized, and that we're doing the same things the same way. I think what we found back in 2008 in the recount was that there was some cities that were doing things differently and how they were processing absentees in particularly. And of course, we've had some law changes and a lot of process changes since then that have addressed those issues. But that's, I think, where we saw that weakness there. That has become a strength now here in Minnesota, that we've addressed those things. We found that by standardizing and working with our county and the state, that these things can be resolved.
And I would just, if I could add, just the experience and the expertise of both Deb and Tom with elections. They are very highly respected among city clerks in the entire state of Minnesota because of their collaborative efforts. And it's very easy to see why clerks have jumped on that bandwagon. We believe in that. We want to hear what everyone has to say about the issues, how that it affects them, and how we can make a stronger product for voters and for our election judges.
Okay. So the first thing people do when they come to their polls, and by the way, I'm sure all the cities have information on the polling, and even if you go to the Secretary of State's website, you type in your address and your name, and they can tell you if you're registered, they can tell you where your polling place is. I mean, it's so darn easy in this day of technology. So the first thing you come in that door to vote, you're going to encounter election judge.
Yes.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about the training and the hours that election judges work, because I think the public needs to know how long they're there.
Yes.
This year it's been really interesting because, as you've talked about a little bit, is that we have, for the first time in Hennepin County, are using electronic rosters that we call poll books. And so all of our election judges attended poll book training for an hour and a half. In addition to, in my city, it ended up being about a 2.5-hour basic election judge training, where they come and they listen to some lecture, they go through some exercise, we have some scenarios they work on, they have some discussion questions that they fill out, so that they are versed in how do you register someone, what is the process for opening a package of ballots, what paperwork do you need to do when you get there in the morning? What posters need to go up? How do you set your polling place up?
Yes.
And what time in the morning is that?
They start at 6 o'clock in the morning, and a great many of my head judges actually make arrangements to go in the night before or at 5:30 in the morning, so they get a head start on being ready to go, because the polls open at 7 a.m. and they need to be ready to go. And in Edina, I ask that my judges work the entire day. The polls close at 8. It usually takes 45 minutes to an hour for them to complete their work, so they have worked on election day from 6 a.m. until approximately 9 p.m.
And so that's a long day
long
by
day.
anybody's
It's a long day.
standards.
It's a very long day, and they do it so well.
Yes, they do.
Did somebody want to say, okay, you mentioned the word poll books. Now, the people that voted in the primary election already encountered one.
Yes.
But for those that haven't, what is a poll book?
Well,
And what does it look like?
a poll book is actually, it looks like an iPad sitting on a stand in a battery base. And so when you come into the polling place, you're going to give the first 3 letters of your last name and the first 3 letters of your first name. That poll book judge will be looking up the voter's name. In years past, we used a hard copy paper roster where they had to flip through all the pages to find them. This system is very intuitive, and it will find the voter very quickly. And they can use other information too to help them narrow their search, like a date
Confirm
of
that they have
birth.
the right voter.
Yep, they want to make sure that they have the right voter in front of them. And so then at that point, once they have verified they have the right voter, they will go through the process, the steps on the poll book. They'll be printing out a voter signature certificate. It has an oath on it, and the voters do need to attest to that oath. They sign it to affirm the oath, and at that point they would receive a registered voter's receipt to obtain a ballot.
And we refer to these poll books as any line, any time. If
Yes.
you remember when we used to have paper ballots, we would split those books up, sometimes into 4 different books, and they would go to A to H and F to J. Well, now it's any line, any time. Even if you're somebody that needs to register, the poll book can both check you in and register you on election day. So the greeter judge who greets you at the door will determine what line or which poll book is open, and so hopefully they will be able to help manage that line process.
Yes.
But a voter may go to any one of the poll books. If a voter needs to register on election day, every piece of information that is captured on the paper voter registration form is now captured in the poll book. So the election judge will ask the voter a series of questions. By providing that information and showing the proper proof of residence on election day, the voter will then, in effect, fill out a voter registration application online, on the poll book, that will then be printed out with the oath for a voter registration oath and their voter signature certificate. So there'll be two places for a voter who is registering to sign. And it will take a little longer for them than it would for somebody who's pre-registered and just checking in.
And that oath and that signature is very important because it is a felony
It is.
to provide false information.
Correct.
And that's something people, that felony is not a light matter like some other things that are misdemeanors. And I think that needs to be pointed out to people. It is a felony to provide false information.
Yes.
Okay, so they're all checked in. They got their little receipt that says they're eligible to get a ballot. Then what happens?
Well,
I think we all know, but go ahead and say it.
Yeah. Well, they receive a registered voter certificate, or excuse me, a registered voter's receipt that's initialed by that poll book judge. They go over to the demonstration judge, who's sitting next to the ballot judge, and they have a supply of initialed ballots. The demonstration judge instructs the voter how to properly mark the ballot, and the ballot judge issues a ballot, one ballot, into a secrecy folder along with a marking pen, and they are directed to a voting booth or the automark or another writing surface if they so choose.
Okay.
They vote their ballot. When they're done, they put their ballot into the DS200, the ballot counter, where their ballot is processed and accepted.
And now it's not brand new, that machine, but it has been updated in the last couple of years.
2013.
Because obviously,
Right.
just like anything else, voting machines go out.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people, not a lot of people, but if people think about it, they say, well, what if the power goes off? What does the machine have?
We have there's a battery backup on that machine.
Yes.
And so I think it has about a 7-hour battery. And
Okay.
hopefully within 7 hours, we're going to be able to figure out how to get the power back on that polling place, or we probably have a bigger issue than the ballot counter. But our poll books that they're checking in on are standing on bases that have a 30-hour battery.
Okay, so there's
So we
no
have
one
we
is-
have some, and we actually have some backup plans. We have emergency plans in place and what to do if we have a situation arise.
We are city clerks. We have contingency plans.
Yeah.
Contingency plans after that.
Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about how to prove you're a citizen? Well, number one, prove who you are, and number two, that you live in the precinct.
I think I'll let one of these two
Oh,
take care
okay.
of that one.
Okay.
Deb?
Well, in Minnesota, for the last 40 years, we've had election day registration. So if you come into a polling place and you need to register, you may do so by filling out the form that you need to fill out, and then you have specific things that show that are proof of residence. There are a number of standalone documents, a valid driver's license with your name and address at where you currently live, or a receipt for the same, a Minnesota ID card, a Minnesota learner's permit. Those all are standalone documents. If you don't have a standalone document that you may use, there are a number of photo identification cards that you can use, a passport, a veteran's ID, an outdated Minnesota driver's license, learner's permit, or ID, along with another document that would include, and let's see if I can go through the list. You need to
It's
have
long. The list is long.
it's a long list. You need to have a utility statement, a credit card statement, a bank statement, a lease. If you're a student, you have a fee statement for the current residence, and they all have to be in your name, showing the address at which you're saying you reside, and it has to be dated within 30 days of the election. So if somebody needs to bring a proof with them, we need to make sure that they don't bring something from July and expect to register in November.
Maureen, I think one of the most important things a voter can do to be prepared for Election Day, and we ask that they do this, is to go to the Secretary of State's website, look at the specific documents that they might need to register on Election Day, and make sure that they have those documents. And also they will find there a sample ballot so they can see specific to their precinct what's going to be on their ballot so they can be prepared. When they go in there, they'll know, oh, I'm going to be voting for a city council member or a county commissioner. In addition, a lot of people just they see all the information about a presidential election, but there's a lot of other things on the ballot. And we hope that our voters come to the polling place prepared to know what their decisions are going to be, or at least have the opportunity to review the sample ballot so they know what they're going to be looking at. And if they need to register on Election Day, or they need to know where they need to go to vote on Election Day, that they look it up ahead of time and be prepared, and it'll make it a lot easier, a lot quicker, and for them to vote on Election Day.
And I am going to interject, though, there are still people that depend on programs like this or calling the city hall because, number one, either they don't have a computer,
Right.
or maybe they just older than the computer by a number of years. And I think especially for someone, I think of like, my parents, the decision to go into assisted living was made pretty fast. And
Yep.
if that had been in October,
Yes.
Right.
if Minnesota didn't have this kind of thing, they wouldn't have been able to vote.
No, they
Right,
would.
and they can, your parents in assisted living can get an absentee ballot,
Yes.
which they can get via the mail. In fact, they can actually apply for a permanent absentee. So they could have an application
Yes.
sent to them for every election in their jurisdiction once they fill that paperwork out and send it in. And then Hennepin County would mail to them an absentee ballot application, and when they fill that out and send it in, the ballot gets simply mailed to them. There are some things they have to do to properly fill out the envelopes that secure their absentee ballot, and that is pretty specific. But again, we frequently will have an elderly person call our absentee office, and we walk them through.
Yes. Yes.
So it's, we do, I think all of us are just wedded to the computer and the internet and whatnot, but we have to keep in mind
Correct.
that they're either due to financial issues or to age, people don't have that kind of access.
Right.
And also one other thing is that if they don't have access to see sample ballots, don't have access via computer, and don't have the internet, they certainly can go to their city hall, and the city clerk will provide copies for them. And candidate information is on websites, but we certainly have phone numbers we can provide so that voters of any age can contact the candidates directly to know what issues they stand for and if they agree with them.
Well, and I volunteer at the Southdale Library shelving books, and I know, too, the number of people that are using the computers there. And again, if there's any questions, people can also ask like a librarian. They will get them where they need to go.
Yes.
There are people are out there.
Yes.
And,
Yep.
so.
If I could just pick
Sure.
one thing with regarding to voter registration, it would be so helpful if voters could become pre-registered voters.
Right.
The deadline to do that is 5 p.m. on October 18th. And what you need to do is just, you can do it online. If you don't have a computer or internet, then you go to your city hall. You can fill out a voter registration application. We'll actually mail it in for you. And they can be pre-registered so that they're part of the poll books, the database of all the registered voters in the precinct, which will be very, very helpful to help move lines quickly on Election Day, as we know that there will be lines. But this is the easiest thing that they could do to help prepare for that.
And if I may interject, I know the League of Women Voters is also does a number of projects where we try to get people registered. I know we're going to be at Richfield's Pen Fest table, and we'll have registration forms for and we'll be at the library in Richfield, and we're also going to partner with the schools to get the kids that are turning 18 to
Great.
register. And I know the Edina League is doing it, and Bloomington is
Yes,
doing it.
they are.
So there's a lot of things. And we should say, too, on these proofs, that if you register same day, if it's on your cell phone, you can use that.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yep.
You can
That's
display it.
relatively new.
It's probably been about 4 or 5 years.
I think it's been 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah. And you can display an electronic version of your bill as your documentation. You don't have to go at home and search through the piles to try to find your CenturyLink bill or your Excel Energy bill.
Yeah, it's not fine. And those young kids are doing everything with their cell phones these
Right,
days.
right.
Let's see, returning the ballots, again, is simple. Just return it to a city hall, or you can return it to Hennepin County, or in person, or you just mail it,
Right.
the registration. Anything, what else? I know there's something we've missed here.
Well, Janet's City Hall and my City Hall will be open for in-person absentee
That's it.
Yes.
voting. We open on the 23rd of September. We will
Yes.
be open through the 7th of November. Starting on the 1st of November, when in-person voters come into our City Hall, they don't have to use the envelope system. They will be able to put their ballot directly into a ballot counter before leaving the City Hall. And we're very excited about that.
It's almost like early voting. Maybe that's what it's called.
It's very similar to
Very
that.
similar.
However,
Not quite.
yeah.
Not
yeah.
quite
They
yet.
still need to fill an absentee ballot application out
Yes.
in order
Is
to
that
do
what
that.
you do?
Yes.
One of the advantages to the voter for this system for the last 7 days prior to the election and being able to put their absentee ballot directly into the ballot counter is that if they have any errors, if they've overvoted or anything like that, then it's discovered then and they can get a new ballot, just like in a polling place on election day, where if you mail it in, you don't have that opportunity. So I
They
think
accidentally checked
Right.
2 boxes
Yep.
instead
Correct.
of one.
if it was a vote for
Correct.
one and they voted for 2, they'll at least get the opportunity to correct that error.
Correct.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Yes, it
Right.
is.
We're very happy about that.
And we are looking at staying open some extended hours on a Saturday, and then looking at that week when direct balloting takes place, that Tuesday, beginning that Tuesday before Election Tuesday, just to make sure that people who are working late and can't get off, that they have the ability to vote too. Everybody's vote counts.
Yeah, I mean, it's not everybody works 9 to
Right.
4:30 or
That's right.
Right.
And
Right.
and some people really do need to sleep rather than stay up late.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think we would like to also, it's something we'd like to urge our voters, is to think about Election Day. At 7 o'clock in the morning, there's usually big lines.
Yes.
And
because
people get
before going-
frustrated because they want to go vote before they go to work in the morning. If they're able to come midday, there usually is not a line. So
That's
if they
true.
think about that a little bit, and sort of change their voting style a little bit, if it works for them. If it doesn't and they have to go
Right.
at 7 o'clock in the morning, of course we encourage that and understand that.
Yes.
But again, we also are looking at longer hours during that last week of when they can actually put their ballots into the ballot counter to give people a little more opportunity to come in and cast their ballot.
Yes.
Well, and I even think of parents with young kids.
Right.
You know, if the husband has to be somewheres or even out of town or something, and mom's there with 3 little ones, you know, that's not easy voting at 6 o'clock. So that open ballot will be just wonderful.
Yeah.
And I know I've seen with, you know, a parent with young kids where literally, even if the line was long, people in the line told her to go up to the front. And I thought, that is Minnesota nice.
It is.
That is. That's good to hear.
So,
I just want to point out one thing with the direct balloting, where voters who are voting by absentee ballot and placing their ballot into the DS200, the ballot counter, that those results have to be kept private. They can't be released, and those ballots are secured under lock and key. And then after 8 p.m., then those results would be released. But we do safeguard those ballots, as we do any absentee ballots.
yes, and all that is kept for, what did they say, 2 years or something like
Yeah.
that? Now,
Right.
are those ballots stored at the county, or are they
At the
stored in
city.
each city?
At the city.
In each city.
Oh, every city has
If you look in
that.
my election cage, I have about 50 or 60 boxes of general 2014 ballots.
Okay. And then ultimately they go into shredders, I would imagine.
That's right.
Yes, they do.
Anything else? Boy, we covered everything. Let's see. Now I know that there'll be people and the lines form, like I say, at Disney World, where you have very long lines. The city's worked very hard at trying to make the polling places comfortable for the voters.
We really do, and we are so thankful for our election judges. If you think about it, we have a dedicated force of election judges in Minnesota who take their jobs very seriously, who do their best to make the polling places safe, neutral territory for their neighbors to come in and cast their ballots in privacy and secrecy.
Yes.
And I am so proud of the work that Minnesota's election judges do in the polling places. We couldn't do it without that great group of people.
And we are recruiting election judges.
I was just going to ask, we've got about a minute and a half.
Okay.
Quickly, do we still need judges?
Yes, absolutely. Every city needs judges. So if you'd like to contact your city hall, talk to them about it. We've already set up our training. We will be in communication with those individuals, send you an application that you are required to fill out. We'll get you plugged in and get you trained.
It's one thing on my list of things to do real soon.
I think one thing I ask voters to do is thank those election judges as they leave the polling place after they voted, because those election judges are dedicated, they work hard, and they make it possible for all of us to vote.
I have one election judge who has been working as an election judge since 1954.
54, oh my goodness. Good for her.
Yes.
Okay, well, I really want to thank you all for coming by. I know you're very busy, so this means a lot to the League of Women Voters Richfield to have you here.
Thank you for having us.
Well, it's just wonderful for you to be here. And again, for my online, or for my television viewers, my guests today have been Janet Lewis, who's the clerk at Bloomington, Tom Ferber, who used to be city clerk in a number of different places, including Richfield and Bloomington, and then Deb Mangan, who's a longtime clerk from Edina. And I say that long time, not reflecting your age. What I'm trying to say is you're a very dedicated city public employee, as are all of you. And again, I thank you as a
Thank you for the work that you do also.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
We appreciate what the League does as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I thank you and good night.